The Dalet is a man bent over. Let's draw that. A man bent over, humbled. Maybe he's humbled by sickness or poverty, loss of reputation, loss of loved ones maybe by a sense of his own sin. Maybe he has chosen humility and is neither poor, sick nor lonely, just hungry for a closer walk with Jesus, more of God. I'll just show you an interesting, well-known picture of a man humbled. It's taken from Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan, and you see the pilgrim is bent over because of a load on his back. That's the load of sin. But it's an interesting picture inside. I'll show you another picture here. Look, this is interesting because this is where Christian is entering through a doorway, and he's bent over with the load of sin on his back. By the way, the load of sin disappears, rolls off his back when he comes to the cross of Jesus and receives his forgiveness. But that's a beautiful picture, isn't it? These were painted by Harold Copping many years ago. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Matthew 5:4. These are some of the sweetest words ever spoken in this world. He that dwelleth in the secret place shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Psalm 91 verse 1. The Dal, or humble man, knows that right well. The treasure he seeks is found on the other side of the Dalet, the door, and he'll give whatever is necessary to find it. More of the sense of God's presence is his one ambition. With regard to an arrogant person, God says, I and he cannot dwell together. That's found in the Talmud. And God says, I will dwell in a high and holy place, and also with him who is of a humble and contrite spirit. That's Isaiah 57:15. The entry into true spirituality and relationship with God, and with others for that matter, is through a deep sense of humbleness. Pride isolates us from God and from other people. Humility draws us together. In fact, pride isolates us from ourselves. The proud person is not in his right mind. By the way, we've probably all met the person who is very humble before God, but not so before other people. The measure of true humility is what I am before other people. Now, whether we see this letter, Dalet, as a humble person bent over or a lowly door, the message is the same. Humility leads to God. I cannot enter this door with my head held high. Countless other doors, higher doors, that don't expect us to be humble, rather the opposite, beckon us to enter. Doors that lead to the praise of people, fame, wealth, or health, or to almost endless pleasures. At best, they lead us to a dead end, a lonely place. At worst, they lead us to a wasted life, and a life that brings pain to others. If we don't forsake our empty pride, it will be torn from us in the end, either here or in eternity. We're fortunate if it's here and have time to rectify our mistakes. Be grateful if you've ever entered those doors and escaped. Jesus is the lowly door that leads to life. All that's necessary is a humble confession of our sin and a childlike trust in Jesus. Couldn't be simpler. Blessed are the poor in spirit, the humble that is, for they shall be comforted. And the word blessed means happy. The devil has largely succeeded in convincing the world that humility means misery. And he likes to propagate the image of a gloomy, sanctimonious Christian. It's a lie. Nothing could be further from the truth. Do you remember the story of the proud but leprous Naaman? 2 Kings chapter 5. Yes, he was in great need. He was miserable because of his illness and had probably sought relief from everything and anything that money could buy, but to no avail. As a last resort, he sought out the prophet of the God of his foreign neighbours, the Israelites. And that's when an obstacle to his healing reared its ugly head. The text describes him. He was a great man and an honourable man and a mighty man in valour. That's all found in verse 1. And so, when he arrived grandly before the house of Elisha and received a message from a mere servant of the prophet to go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, verse 10, he was outraged. Now, this is no exaggeration. Read the story. I suppose if we put ourselves in his shoes, we can understand his outrage. But the stakes were high, and seeking God's help is not just some alternative medicine, which is probably how Naaman viewed it. Naaman's answer revealed fatal pride. Behold, I thought he will surely come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and strike his hand over the place and cure the leprosy. Verse 11. Goodness me, he not only expected healing, but that he would be accompanied with a fanfare, followed by a personal interview with Elisha himself. But Elisha's God cannot live with the arrogant man unless he first humbles himself. Naaman's servant's comments were also revealing. He said this, "If the prophet had bid thee to do some great thing, wouldst thou not have done it?" That's verse 13. Yes, he would have done it. But then he would have felt that he had earned his healing. And having his pride puffed up even more, his final condition would have been worse than the first. Healed of leprosy, his wicked pride would have been his ruin at last. God was actually being kind to him. God always has the whole person in view, you see, knowing that frequently a bodily sickness can be an indication of a deeper malady. Not always, but on occasions. God loved Naaman. Isn't that amazing? Leaders in those days could be pretty ruthless and arrogant, but God is the God of grace. His love is always undeserved. If I have failed and have to search for traces of anything which I could truly call a success, the door to Jesus is open. If hardly a day goes by without my being made aware of my sin and failure, the door remains open. If relationships have soured and harsh words have been exchanged that cannot be retrieved, the open door of Jesus, himself the humblest of all men, beckons me to enter. He at least is not ashamed to associate with the likes of me. There's no place for pride in the way of Jesus. He chooses the company of failures. That's why I'm here. By the way, Naaman eventually dropped his foolish pride, bathed in the river whose name means to descend, the Jordan, and emerged completely healed. Let's hope he was permanently healed of his pride as well as his leprosy. The way of humility is the happiest road of all because Jesus walks that way. Now, one of the most joyful people in the Bible was King David. And it's fitting that we mention him while thinking of the Dalet because his name begins and ends with a Dalet. Dalet, Vav, Dalet. Humility at the beginning, humility at the end, and the Vav of connection between the two. His life was held together by his humble relationship with God. And this was the man who wrote most of the Psalms, called Israel's songbook. David himself was called Israel's sweet singer, and yet he was permeated with humility. Oh, for a king who sings to the Lord the way David did. What a blessing that would be to any country. Humility is not a miserable condition, but one of joy and praise, joy unspeakable and full of glory, 1 Peter 1:8. Don't let pride keep any of us from crossing the threshold of that lowly door, a day away from Jesus is a day wasted. Now, one other thought on this subject. The Dalet forms the first letter of the word Dirah. Dirah, which means dwelling place. And it's used in the Talmudic phrase, God's dwelling place below. Hence, the full meaning of the Dalet is the door through which the humble enter into God's dwelling place.